So I get to talk about what I love to talk about, which is sound in the brain. And so this is the home page of our website. And our website we call Brain Volts. And if you look at the different panels, these are the different things we study. We study music, we study rhythm, we study concussion, aging, language, autism, bilingualism. You might ask, what are they doing at Brain Volts? It's all under the umbrella of sound in the brain. Sound is an immense, powerful force in our life, and it is a force that is really a part of almost everything we do. So I wrote a book. It's called Of Sound Mind, How Our Brain Constructs a Meaningful Sonic World. And I wrote it for you. I wrote it for people who are curious, spiritually, intellectually curious about the world we live in, the powerful forces in our lives. And it's not written for a specialist in any particular field. It is written for the fact that sound is pervasive, and I hope that you'll find meaning in it. This is what I wanted the cover of the book to look like, but MIT Press wanted to go with clip art. But I worked on this book. I worked on this book with an artist. There are 80 pictures in the book. And part of my job and part of what I do is I live the art in science. There's so much art in science. And this picture, which is illustrated by Katie Shelley, she's made a lot of the illustrations in the book, I think it captures some of the awe that I feel when I think about sound and sound in the brain. So how did I get to studying sound in the brain? The woman over there, that's my mommy. And I grew up in a household where more than one language was spoken, and my mom was a pianist. And one of my favorite places to be was underneath the piano when she played, because it just felt great. It sounded wonderful to be there. And when I first went to college, I majored in comparative literature because I knew some languages and I liked to read. But then I took some biology and thought, ooh, I really liked this biology. Then I ran into a book called The Biological Basis of Language, and blown away. Ooh, you can combine these ideas. This is what I want to do. But you know, I didn't really get there until I started getting an inkling about what I was stumbling into, maybe as a junior or senior in college. So none of this fourth grade business. Yeah, I really was climbing trees. I had other things on my mind. But when I first began studying the stuff, I started out studying a phenomenon called two-tone suppression in the auditory nerve of the chinchilla. And I was explaining to my mom, what I was doing, and she was saying, Nina, what are you doing? And I realized, I came to the real, even though there are 16 people in the world that I can really talk to about two-tone suppression in the auditory nerve, it's kind of cool. But I want to talk to you. I want to talk to my mommy. I didn't want to spend my time doing something that my mom wouldn't think was important or even understandable. So I started then, I moved from chinchillas to bunny rabbits, and I was looking at the responses of individual neurons. So here's a rabbit, and of course, as I'm talking to you now, the neurons in your brain are producing electricity. I had an electrode in an individual neuron that responded to sound. Then I taught the animal that the sound had a meaning. And right in front of my eyes and ears, I could see, same bunny, same sound, but the response of the neuron changed. And this is, in fact, this is what happens to all of us every day, all the time. This happens to us in our life in sound. Our life in sound shapes who we are. It makes us us. Our neurons really do change based on what we do, which is why it's really important to make good choices for how we spend our time and how our kids spend their time. So the first part of the book is how sound works. And, it's a story that I love to tell. I've been told it many times. I feel like a little kid who says, tell me the story about sound, because I love to hear it over and over again. It's really cool. So sound, of course, enters the brain via the ear, and there are pathways that go from the ear to the brain. More importantly, and not as well recognized, are the pathways that feed back to the ear. I mean, the ear has to listen to the brain. And it is these downstairs pathways, they're called efferent pathways. They are more and more prolific the more evolved our animals, organisms get. And it is these brain to ear pathways that allow us to learn. And so the sound brain is vast. And I really want you to take away this idea that the sound brain, the hearing brain, engages how we think, how we feel, how we move, and information from our other senses. So the hearing brain does not work in isolation. It really brings in so much of our brain. Now here, I want you to listen to this sentence. There's a sentence in here. See if you can hear it. Anybody? Okay, here it is. This is the sentence.
The juice of lemons makes fine punch.
Okay, now I'm going to play the first one again. So, do you believe me? What you know about sound influences how we make sense out of it. Clearly, what we know, what we remember, what we pay attention to is part of our hearing brain. So, the formal way of saying that is that the hearing brain engages our cognitive, sensory, motor, and reward networks. What do I mean by that? So, by reward, it's how we feel. Cognitive, what we know. Sensory, all of our senses. And motor is movement. You cannot have sound without movement. And I'm creating sound right now by moving my body. So we have these pathways that go upstairs and downstairs, and they are influenced by our cognitive, sensory, motor, and reward systems. So sound really engages a lot of our brain, and yet we live in this visually dominated world. People don't even pay attention to sound. Why is that? At the National Institutes of Health, there was a National Institute for Vision 14 years before there was one for hearing. Sound is invisible. So, if you have a visual object, it has a color, a shape, a size, a texture. It has ingredients that you can all recognize. Well, we know that sound also has ingredients, but it has ingredients like pitch, timing, timbre, harmonics, phase. But all of this is happening invisibly. So how can we have access to this? The work on animal models informs us about what's happening in all of us. And by using scalp electrodes, again, as you're hearing my voice, your brain is producing electricity. Electricity is the currency of the nervous system, and we can pick that up. We can measure it. And we do that in various people, and people who have spent their lives doing various activities involving sound. So here are some of the sound ingredients. So sound itself is invisible. All these ingredients are invisible. And you who's doing sound up there, you have a mixing board. You have all of these ingredients that are happening simultaneously now while I'm talking. I think of it as these ingredients need to enter the brain, and then I can think of the brain as kind of a mixing board where the faders are going up and down depending on how you spend your life in sound. So again, the choices we make for how we spend our lives in sound are very important. Biologically, we are what we do. And so we can measure, you can deliver a sound wave into the ear with earbuds, and here's the sound wave, and here's the brain wave. You can see that we have the technology such that the brain wave actually physically resembles the sound wave, and as I'll show you in a minute, it sounds like the sound wave. But we can see how good a job this little guy is doing at picking up all these different aspects of sound processing. So we can listen to the brain. In the same way as right now, the movement of air, which is creating sound, is being picked up by this microphone, turned into electricity, and then the electricity is fed out through the speaker. The speaker will convert that electricity back into the sound wave again, and you can hear it. We can listen to the sound. As you're listening to the sound, you are creating electricity. We can take the electricity from your brain, feed it out, and we can listen to it. So, here we go. Here's a sound wave. Here's the brain wave. It's kind of amazing, right? So we have a lot to work with. Here is heart and soul and the brain. This is my favorite. That's pretty cool, right? Here is Renee Fleming singing the beginning of The Sound of Music, and then The Hills Are Alive with and then Sound of Music is what we've measured somebody listening to her voice.
The hills are alive with the sound of
So, this is all going on in our brains, and we can understand what is going on in our brains. And importantly, so here is a healthy brain listening to Amazing Grace. Now here's a brain that has suffered a concussion. So I'm going to talk, when I talk about our sonic selves in just a second, I'm going to talk about the influence of musical experience and the influence of getting hit in the head. What does concussion do, and why would it disrupt the hearing brain? Well, it does. So it's still recognizable, but a lot of the sound details are gone, and there's a lot more noise. Importantly, each one of us hears the world differently, and I love this. So if you take a little piece of A Hard Day's Night, here are 3 healthy brains listening to the same clip of a little MIDI player playing A Hard Day's Night. This is brain 1. Brain 2. And here comes brain 3. So the differences are they're actually quite remarkable if you study them and quantify them. And so it really tells us that each one of us hears the world in a different way. And this is kind of fun. I want to play this little clip for you. This was a little performance at the Kennedy Center. So finally, we have science meets art. Here is the brain keyboard. And we have recorded the brain's response to every note on the keyboard. Can you play a couple notes for us? So this is the brain's response to individual notes. And now you will hear Mark Meadows play the brain. Thank you. Fun with science, right? So our life in sound creates a unique fingerprint, and here are 6 different people, and you can see their brain, first of all, their fingerprints are different. This is their response to a speech sound, and if I record your brain responses to sound today and then tomorrow, it's going to look the same. So here's this person 1, person 2, person 3, person 4, person 5, person 6. So, you know, we all have a brain signature. So remember, we have these pathways that connect our ear to brain. The midbrain is in the middle of the action. We have pathways that go from our brain to the ear, and it's informed by our cognitive, sensory, motor, and reward systems. And this really helps create who we are, which is our memories for sound. So hearing involves much more than the classical auditory pathway. We can access this integrity, and our life in sound makes us us. That's really what this first part of our sonic, how sound works and how we can measure it is all about. Now, the important point is that our life in sound shapes our brain and shapes who we are. And making music, making music is the jackpot, and I'm going to focus on that. But I want to give you an idea of some of the other topics that are covered in my book. So music, of course, the jackpot. Rhythm, the root of language is sound. So and education in music is important for language. Music and language are a partnership. The bilingual brain, birdsong. Noise, huge. Aging and the sound mind. Sound and brain health, athletes and concussion. And then our sonic past, present, and what kind of a sonic world are we going to create? What kind of sonic brains are we going to create for ourselves and for our children? So with music, then, music is the jackpot, because we know that music engages what we know, how we feel, how we move, and it combines information from our other senses. It does that really, really well. This is what the hearing brain does, and music really is the jackpot. So if we measure now the brain's response in musicians, by musicians, I'm not talking about professional musicians, I'm talking about people who regularly play a musical instrument, a kid in band. Importantly, there are certain ingredients in sound that are strengthened when you play a musical instrument, and voice counts. And these are the FM sweeps, the harmonics, and certain aspects of timing. These are hugely important for making sense of the consonants and vowels that I'm producing right now, especially if it's in a noisy place. And the harmonics is what enables us to tell a flute and a piano apart. They're playing the same note, but they sound different. It's the harmonics, it's the timbre. And so the musician's signature is this. Interestingly, the language signature is the same. So music strengthens the sound ingredients that are important for language. Kids with language disorders have their faders turned down on one or more of these ingredients. Rhythm is a really important part of music, obviously, but you probably don't realize how important it is for language. And in my lab, we study the same kids who are doing rhythm tasks, and we measure their brain's response to sound. And we find that kids who are good at, for example, following a beat, have rhythmic responses to sound This is their brain responses, and it is the kids who have these rhythmic responses to the rhythms in sound who also have better language skills. Now, this is, I think, the best demonstration of the rhythm in language.
You're a cheat and a swindler. That's what you are. How can you do a thing like this? Build up a little boy's hopes and then smash all his dreams to pieces. You're an inhuman monster. I said good day.
Okay, there is rhythm in speech. And there are different rhythm intelligences. So when I first started our work on rhythm, I thought, well, if you were good at one kind of rhythm, you'd be good at all kinds of rhythms. It's not true. If you take something like, who stole the cookie from the cookie jar? You have, this is the beat, right? And it's also in the time signature. Then there's the pattern. Who stole the cookie from the cookie jar? So that's the note values and the rests. And they're both in music. And you can't predict how well a person will do following rhythm patterns from how they do following a beat. So these are different intelligences, and they are both engaged in music. Music has these both. And so you can imagine, and again, these are rhythms that are nested in time, both in the sound wave and in the brain waves, occurring from microseconds to milliseconds to seconds in time. And the brain needs to be good at disentangling these rhythms. And so music is a wonderful way to strengthen rhythm skills, obviously for music, but did you think about how important it is for strengthening your language abilities, especially following conversations in noise? It's the rhythm of speech that helps you fill in the gaps when you are listening in a challenging environment. And there are various, even computer games to strengthen rhythmic skills, and this is something that we're looking into actually with our athletes after they have sustained concussions, but more of that in a minute. So there are various arguments for music education, and one that I think is a really important one is the intangible one. You know, for scientists, they always want to know the answer. They always think that there is a single answer, and my students are always mad at me because mostly when they ask me a question, I will tell them, it depends. But the intangible parts of a music education are the friendships that you make and the way in which our brains actually physically synchronize with each other in a group, and the confidence that you get, the confidence that you know, for mastering something, that you take that confidence with you all the time. So we studied kids in schools. We paired the kids. We had two groups that we matched in every way we could with their IQ and reading skills, etc. And one group got music in schools, and the other had another enrichment activity, and then we measured the brain's response to sound. And this happened in elementary schools and in high schools in LA and in Chicago. And these were all in low-income areas. And it turns out that one of the signatures of living in poverty is linguistic deprivation that seems to be tied with maternal education. And one of the things that we did, so these are some of the kids in our studies, one of the things that we did, first of all, is we looked at reading scores in these low-income areas and found that typically there is this achievement gap where reading scores get worse over time. But the kids in these low-income areas who played music maintained their age-appropriate reading scores. The same is true for listening to speech and noise. After 1 year, we didn't see a difference between the groups, but after 2 years of making music, there was a difference. And we can see it just automatically, objectively, in the brain's response to sound. In someone who makes music, you can see a strong response to sound in quiet, in a favorable listening environment, and this is in a noisy environment. Whereas the non-musician, you have a nice response when it's quiet and it's an easy listening environment. When it gets tough, the non-musician really takes a hit. And we found that when we divided the kids based on maternal education in the same classroom, we found that the kids whose moms had more education had cleaner brain responses to sound, and they had less neural noise. You know, the noise is just the static, random, unsynchronized electricity that is happening in all of our brains. So, you know, we have this signature for poverty and linguistic deprivation, which involves the harmonics, the timing, and how stable the response is over time. You know, if the kid is hearing, you say the same word and he's hearing it differently each time, how is he to learn? And we found that, so these ingredients are reduced and the neural noise is high, but music can partially offset this. It doesn't change the neural noise, but it strengthens the ingredients, the sound processing. So this is important for so many reasons. Speaking another language. Speaking another language will strengthen other components of sound. It's a different story. I'm not going to get into it. But still, it strengthens the signal. It takes time to shape the brain. We didn't see these fundamental changes in sound processing in the brain until 2 years of just regular music making in schools or after-school programs. These have lifelong impacts. So when we measure responses to older adults 40 years after they've stopped making music, if they've had a musical education, they have stronger brains, because once you have learned to make these sound-to-meaning connections, you continue to make them throughout your life. And of course, you know, as you typically with aging, some of this processing gets reduced and the brain gets noisier, but people who regularly make music have hearing brains that are indistinguishable from that of a younger person. With emotion, we know that if your baby's crying in the night, you want to know, do I get up or do I let him cry? And musicians are really good. It's the harmonics, remember? The harmonics in sound, they will tell you in a baby's cry, does he mean it or not? Or is this just a cry? And so people with musical experience have a really high representation of the harmonics, and so they can really make sense of, you know, making this really important decision. Should I get up? Or should my baby cry for a while? We'll all both have a better day tomorrow. And memory, and this is something that Chip is very involved with songs and the songs that we learn. Our sonic memories are so much a part of us. They stay with us until we die, and even if we start forgetting other things, we will always remember those songs, and we will always remember the sound. You know, when my kids call me up, I was just talking to my son, you know, it's, whenever we talk to each other on the phone, we revel in, oh, it's so good to hear the sound of your voice, because we've spent years getting to know each other that way. Don't take my word for it. These guys know something about sound. They like my book. So just a few words about traumatic brain injury, and then I will stop. So you might wonder, concussion, huh? Well, making sense of sound is one of the hardest jobs we ask our brain to do, which is why getting hit in the head is going to disrupt this timing. You know, sound happens in time, microsecond timing, and if you get hit in the head, this precision just gets disrupted. And I can tell you that concussions can disrupt the hearing brain. And we have a big study now. We are testing all 500 Division I athletes at Northwestern. This is an NIH grant-funded project. We're testing all 500 boys, girls, all in the different sports. At the beginning, at the end of every season, and then if a student gets a concussion, we follow them very regularly over time. And here are some of the adorable students that we are working with. And rhythm, this is, don't even bother looking at the slide, but I just wanted to bring up the fact that something that we're very interested in is the use of rhythm and rhythm therapies to try it as a form of therapy for people who have persistent concussion symptoms. Concussions tend to resolve after about a week, but there are, in about 20% of kids who get concussions, the symptoms persist. And there is some preliminary evidence indicating that rhythm therapies and computer-based rhythm programs can be helpful. And this is something that I think has great promise, and I hope we'll be able to learn more about. But the other thing that we looked at with these 500 athletes is we thought, well, is there something about the physically fit person? Will they have better sound processing in the brain? And so, we asked, we had the 500 elite athletes, Division I athletes, and then 500 Northwestern students, and we saw that, in fact, their sound processing was identical. But what we did also discover, we just discovered this, is that the elite athletes had excessively quiet brains. And since they had quiet brains, they could make sense of sound and of all kinds of other sensory information better than people who weren't athletes. So if you take a typical person here and you look at sound processing in the brain, and here's the background noise. In the athlete, you have the identical sound processing in the brain, but there's less noise. So the sound processing is more prominent, right? And in the musician and the bilingual, they have the same neural noise, but they enhance the response to sound. So they all are better at making sense of their sonic world, but they do it in different ways. So, our life and sound shape sound processing in the brain, rhythm for language and brain injury, and importantly, sound connects us. At this time when we're depressed, alarmed, divisive, sound and just increasingly interacting visually with our screens, we need to connect with each other. And sound is alive, it's present, it's right here, it's in the moment. It's not represented, it's in the moment. And there is this back and forth when you have a conversation with somebody. There is this reciprocity, this betweenness that is something that we should really honor. Obviously, talk to your kids, not to your screens. And this is something that I think we just need to think about, our sonic world. So what we do affects our brain. Many sonic choices to make. And I need to acknowledge the community of scientists who have helped with all the work that I've talked to you about. And then here again is our website, Brain Vaults, which I hope you'll visit and start by taking the website tour so you can find what you're looking for. And I thank you for your attention.